before Richard Petty's car goes airborne end over end. There's 2 or 3 other cars into it.
In car racing, few names are as famous as Richard Petty. To fans, he's the king. Not just because he won an amazing 200 NASCAR races or his 7 big championships, but because he helped turn stock car racing from something small into something huge across America. With his special cowboy hat, dark sunglasses, and blue and red number 43 car, Petty didn't just race cars. He created a whole time period. But behind all the fame, past the cheering crowds and winner circles, there's a place almost no one has ever been inside. A place that tells a different story. One not shown on TV, not talked about in interviews, not put in any museum. It's Richard Petty's private garage in Level Cross, North Carolina. And inside it are things that don't just show history. They are history. Not everything Petty collected ended up behind glass cases. Some things were just too personal, too important, or too raw to show the public. Over the years, he put certain things away. A fire suit he wore during races. An old engine part from a race that almost killed him. Boxes full of handwritten notes, fan letters and race plans. Cars that haven't been touched since their last race many years ago. These weren't just old things. They were reminders of the hard work, the winning, the dangers, and the sad times that shaped his life living on the edge of speed. What makes this garage special isn't how much money the stuff inside is worth, though that's huge. It's the secrecy, the quiet around it on purpose. While some parts of Petty's story have been put in the Petty Museum for fans to see, this place stays something totally different. A private collection, a time machine, a vault of his story known only to his family and a few trusted crew members. And now, for the first time, we're opening that door. Not to stare, but to understand what it means when a man who gave the world everything chose to keep this to himself. To understand what's inside Richard Petty's private garage, you first have to understand the man who filled it. Richard Petty wasn't just a driver. He was and still is the face of American stock car racing. Known simply as the King, his race records can't be beaten. 200 NASCAR wins, 7 big championships, more than 700 top 10 finishes. In the fast, dangerous world of car racing, Petty didn't just compete, he ruled. But numbers alone don't show his real impact. Petty built an empire in Level Cross, North Carolina. Not just a race team, but a movement. Petty Enterprises, the family racing team started by his father Lee Petty, became the most successful in NASCAR history. And after he stopped racing, Richard didn't slow down. Instead, he changed direction, creating Petty's Garage, a custom car shop where new performance met old school skills. It wasn't just about keeping his story alive. It was about making it bigger. Still, there was always one place that stayed mostly hidden from publicity. The original garage, the heart of everything, the one where the earliest builds came to life, where career-changing cars were born. This was not a showroom. It was a living, breathing collection of Petty's journey. From dirt tracks to Daytona, tools still hang where they were left. Old tires marked with lap times in grease pencil line the walls. It's a garage where time doesn't seem to move. Most visitors to the Petty compound never see it. It's off limits during tours, and even many workers have never stepped foot inside. Why? Because for Petty, it's not a place to celebrate the past. It's a place to remember it quietly, personally, as it happened. And in that silence, you will find the truth of his story. Not in trophies, but in what he chose to keep hidden and what those things still mean. Inside that special place sits a treasure chest, not just of racing history, but of American sports heritage. And unlike a fancy museum, these things haven't been cleaned up or arranged. They've been left as they were, as if Richard just stepped away for a moment. The first thing you notice, the original number 43 Plymouth Superbird, not fixed up, not touched, still wearing its battle scars from the track. Tire pieces stuck to the bottom. The faint smell of burned oil still there from its last race day. The Superbird isn't just a car. It's a symbol of winning. A machine that was built for speed, but saved for meaning. Next to it, a 1957 Oldsmobile. The very first car Richard ever raced, built by hand with his father Lee. It's rough. It's rusty. It's beautiful. Because it marks the beginning, the start of a career that would last for decades. Few people even knew it still existed. Even fewer have seen it with their own eyes. But the surprises don't end with the cars. Boxes stacked along one wall are filled with handwritten pit notes and setup logs from the 1970s. Written in pencil, they show everything from tire pressure to fuel decisions, even notes on other drivers' weak spots. These are notebooks of a smart planner, not just a driver. And in one corner, half covered by a dusty cover, sits a custom-built race simulator, an old-style beast Petty used in the 1980s to mentally practice laps before race day. No screens, just mechanical resistance and a driver's instincts. There are even early NASCAR trophies and awards tucked away, some buried under covers or shelves. Many haven't been seen publicly in decades. These are not display pieces. They're keepsakes held onto not for show, but for soul. In a world obsessed with polish and presentation, Richard Petty's garage is different. It's real. And in that realness, it becomes priceless. Even inside Richard Petty's inner sanctuary, there's a door few are allowed to open. A narrow hallway leads to a small unmarked room at the back of the garage. It's not shown on any map. It's not talked about in interviews, but for those who know, they call it the vault. What lies behind that door has been the subject of whispered stories for years. According to a handful of former Petty Enterprises workers, the room contains some of the most personal and painful things from Richard's career. One wall reportedly holds the broken frame of a car from the crash that nearly ended his life in 1980 at Pocono Raceway. Not clean, not restored, just as it was pulled from the wreck, a reminder of being fragile, surviving, and sacrifice. Another corner is said to hold boxes of unopened fan letters from the 1960s and 70s. Some were never answered. Many came from children, veterans, and racing hopefuls. Richard kept them not to forget, but because they meant too much to throw away. There are even items from rivals, particularly Dale Earnhardt, Sr., a helmet sticker, a sign program, a photo taken just weeks before Earnhardt's deadly crash in 2001. These weren't souvenirs. They were signs of mutual respect between two legends who understood each other more deeply than most fans ever will. Family and close crew say Petty sometimes visits the room alone, stays for hours, says nothing. It's not a trophy room, one insider said. It's a room for things that hurt too much to forget and mean too much to share. This is where memory lives unfiltered and where his story becomes something more than legend. When you walk through Richard Petty's private garage, it's easy to become overwhelmed by the huge amount of history packed within its walls. The Superbird alone, untouched and not restored, could sell for over $1.5 million at auction. The 1957 Oldsmobile, his very first race car, is basically priceless. Not because of its engineering, but because of what it represents. The origin of greatness. Stacked beside the vehicles are handwritten pit notes from legendary races, custom steering wheels, prototype parts never mass-produced, and early NASCAR trophies that collectors would pay big money to own. Add to that the memorabilia stored in the back rooms, race suits, original crew jackets, and personalized gifts from racing greats. And the number climbs quickly. Insiders guess that the full collection inside the garage could be valued at $10 million or more, depending on the market. To a museum, these are artifacts. To a collector, they're treasures. To Richard Petty, they're chapters. He's famously said, "These aren't trophies. They're pieces of me." That feeling reveals everything. Petty doesn't see these items as assets to be insured or auctioned. They're memories frozen in time. Reminders of close calls, amazing wins, and the quiet moments in between. This garage isn't put together for fans. It's not for profit. It's for thinking. He's had offers, private buyers, high-profile collectors, even institutions have reached out, eager to showcase parts of his story in rotating exhibitions. But Petty has turned them all down. Because for him, this isn't about keeping his story alive for the world. It's about keeping his identity for himself and his family. Some men collect wealth. Richard Petty collected meaning. And that in the end is something money can't touch. It's easy to think of Richard Petty as a symbol. The sunglasses, the cowboy hat, the calm southern voice. But behind the icon is a man who remembers everything. Every finish line, every wreck, every handshake, every tear. This garage, with its dim lighting and quiet corners, is his sanctuary. It's not a place to celebrate the past, but a place to revisit it carefully, quietly, personally. When asked why he kept so much private instead of putting it on display, Petty once answered, "Because some stories ain't for crowds, they're for the people who live them." That way of thinking runs deep in his family. His son Kyle Petty and grandson Thad Moffitt, both racers in their own right, have spent time in the garage. They don't film, they don't post, they sit, they learn, they listen. It's here among old tires and rusting trophies that lessons are passed down. Not in speeches, but in shared silence, a kind of spiritual handoff. The same tools that once shaped a legend now rest in the hands of those continuing his name on the track. Some artifacts may eventually make it to the Petty Museum. Sure. But others will never leave the room. They're not for fans. They're for family. A story isn't just what you leave behind. It's what you protect while you're still here. And Richard Petty has guarded his with respect and with heart. In sports, most legends are reduced to highlight reels, framed jerseys, magazine covers. But Richard Petty chose something different. He didn't just keep his career safe. He kept his memories with all their grit, pain, and glory intact. This garage, private, dusty, sacred, is more than a collection. It's a living archive of a man who refused to forget what it took to become great. It's where a scuffed helmet still smells like burnt rubber and fear. Where a handwritten race setup still has smudges from sweat. Where the shadows cast by championship cars still move when the door opens.
It's not clean.
It's not put together for show.
It's real.
And that's what makes it powerful. Richard Petty didn't just lock away history.
He locked away truth.
Truth about hard work, about pain, about loving a sport so much that it costs you physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And that's the truth most people never see because it doesn't fit into sound bites or trophies. Most legacies are shown off. Petty's, he hid it in plain sight in a garage where the world isn't invited, but the stories live on. Every item in Richard Petty's private garage tells a story. But the stories aren't neatly labeled or explained. They're built into the things themselves, in the rust, the dust, the dents, and the oil stains. It's the kind of history that doesn't need a sign. You just feel it. Take the fire suit folded carefully on a shelf, still carrying the sweat from a hot race day in Talladega. Or the steering wheel marked with cuts from a tense finish at Martinsville. Even the smell of gasoline soaked into the concrete seems to whisper of races past. In a corner, there's a seat belt cut loose from a car after a bad crash. Saved not as a souvenir, but as a reminder of survival.
These aren't artifacts. They're echoes. Echoes of the risks taken.
The heartbreaks lived through. The victories that came not just with a checkered flag, but with blood and grit and prayer. And for Petty, every object kept was a choice. A decision to remember something specific. A moment of fear, a breakthrough, a friend lost, a lesson learned the hard way. In one tool chest drawer, there's a wrench with the initials LP carved in the handle. Lee Petty's, his father's. It's been used so often the letters have started to fade.
But Petty keeps it close.
Not to honor the memory, but to hold on to it. In Richard Petty's world, steel doesn't just build cars.
It holds emotion.
And in this garage, every nut and bolt carries the weight of a life lived in the fast lane. Richard Petty's public story is loud. The roaring engines, the screaming fans, the cheers at victory lane. But his real story lives in silence, in the stillness of that garage, where no cameras roll and no interviews are done. Most people think a story is about what you give away. But for Petty, it's about what you choose to hold on to. He spent his life not just building a name, but protecting the truth behind that name. That's why the garage isn't open to the public. That's why the locked room stays locked. It's not secrecy. It's sacredness. You can't package that kind of meaning. You can't polish it for display because it's not for the world. It's for the people who were there, for the hands that held the wrenches, the shoulders that carried the weight, and the hearts that broke when the race didn't go their way. It's for his family, for Kyle, for Thad, for the next generation who won't just race under the Petty name. They'll inherit everything it cost to build it. The garage may never be opened to the public. And that's okay because its power isn't in being seen. It's in being remembered by the right people in the right way. Petty didn't build his story to be admired. He built it to be lived. And this garage is where it still lives. Untouched, unfiltered, and eternal. In today's world where stories are often turned into branding and history is polished until it loses all its meaning, Richard Petty did something extraordinary. He kept it real. He didn't lock away his garage to hide it. He locked it to protect it. Because legends fade when they're turned into entertainment. But when they're kept sacred, when they're guarded like memory instead of sold like merchandise, they last forever. And that's what Petty understood better than anyone. He could have sold the Superbird, auctioned the tools, filmed a documentary inside the garage, but he didn't. He chose something quieter, something more lasting. A door closed, a light left off, a life remembered not through applause, but through presence. The next time you hear his name, think not just of the wins or the hat or the number 43. Think of what lies behind that garage door in Level Cross. The place where the king still walks, still remembers, still whispers to the machines that carried him into legend. He didn't just leave behind a story. He built a garage where it still lives quietly, powerfully forever. For some, the race ends at the checkered flag. For Richard Petty, the real story began when the track went silent.